All right. Well, we have today Dr. Russell Yee. He's with the California Citizens Redistricting Commission. And I don't know that there's a more important job right now before our to make our republic work properly. So with no further ado, Dr. Yee has asked to be referred to as Russell. So in our California casual way, we're going to hand it over to you, Russell. And please tell us about this important work that will, by definition, affect and impact all of us.
Thank you so much, Rick. Thank you, chamber members, for coming today and for your interest in this topic. Yes, redistricting, it happens once every 10 years after the decennial census. And so now for the second time in history, California has seated a Citizens Redistricting Commission. In 2008, the good citizens of California voted to give redistricting to a citizen commission instead of having the legislature do it, as had been the case formerly. And the 2010 commission, not the very first in the nation, actually Arizona had one before that, but certainly the first in a state as large and as complex as California. And they were under an extremely compressed timeline. It was a high wire act, but they managed to produce their maps, and they were successful in defending them against several challenges in court, and they've been serving us for these past 10 years. So now with the passage of time, we have the 2020 Commission and time once again to draw these maps. I decided to apply for the commission partly because these are dramatic times for our nation, so much debate, so much polarization, and the opportunity to get involved in a way that I could honestly say put me on everyone's side. I could be on everyone's side serving on the commission. That was really attractive to me. And so I put my name in, and we spent a year in a selection process that was kind of like being on Survivor. There were about 7 different stages of about 20,000 applicants that started off, and the state's auditor conducted a process of winnowing us down. We're all required to submit letters of recommendation, application essays, the state's Form 700, which some of you are familiar with. If you've served in public office, you need to file that financial disclosure form. Interviews. Eventually, there was a lottery stage, even, if you can imagine, with ping pong balls and the whole thing. The lottery stage picked the first 8 of us, and then those first 8 picked the last 6, and I was one of the last 6. So we talk about the lucky 8 and the chosen 6. So I have a slideshow for you, and I'll go ahead and bring that up and tell you about the commission. Okay, seeing that okay? Redistricting basics.
Yes.
Thank you. So one thing I have to note before I jump in is in our discussion today, we're happy to take questions during or after my presentation. We can do this very informally, but we cannot discuss actual lines, actual boundaries. That can only happen in a publicly noticed, agendized, fully public meeting with ADA access and sign language interpretation and all those good things. That's part of our statutory requirements. And the idea, of course, is that the commission can only receive input in a way that makes access equal to everyone. It doesn't matter if you're Tim Cook. It doesn't matter if you're just an individual. You don't even have to be a citizen, just someone who happens to live, somewhere. Individual citizen, the playing field is level in terms of access to the commission. So people can only give input on lines in publicly noticed, agendized meetings. And this is not one of those, so I will not be taking public input. even though you guys have a very, very interesting, we will have a very interesting line to draw at some point with especially your congressional districts, right? Cupertino District 17 and 18, very interesting line there that will certainly be of interest to you when the time comes to think about where to put that line this time. Here are your 14 commissioners. We all represent the whole state. We did divide ourselves up for outreach purposes regionally. And since I'm from Oakland, I'm one of the 2 commissioners assigned to the Bay Area, but we're not regional in terms of line drawing. We all represent the whole state. And so just to mention a few of us, Isra Ahmad, she's actually from San Jose, and she works in the public health department for San Jose. There's 4 of us in the Bay Area. Isra, to the right of her, 2 to the right, Jane Anderson from Berkeley. And then let's see here on the second column, Pedro Toledo from Petaluma. He's a healthcare administrator. And then me from Oakland. So by statute, the commission is composed of 5 from the largest party by voter registration, 5 from the second largest party, and then 4 from neither of those 2 parties. So as California goes, that means 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 4 that are neither Democrat or Republican. As it happens, those 4 this time are all no party preference. They could have just as well have been Green or American Independent, or some other party, but they happen not to be this time. Votes of the commission on the final maps have to pass by supermajority. So it means the majority of each of those 3 categories. So the final maps will have to be approved by 3 out of the 5 Democrats, 3 out of the 5 Republicans, and 3 out of the 4 of the neithers. I have to say, we've been meeting since August, and it's a pleasure serving with these folks. We were selected after a long process that included sizing up our impartiality and our capacity to weigh evidence, analyze things, impartially, and that's produced a group that really gets along. And if you watched our meetings, and all our meetings are public, of course, I would bet that you couldn't accurately guess our party affiliations just by listening to our discussions. We're all committed to, fair and free elections, voting rights, all those things. We all have taken a vow to support and defend the constitutions of California and of the US, and we're all focused on the goal. So that's the 14 of us. And so we've been meeting since August. A lot of the time has been getting organized, hiring a staff. Of course, redistricting only happens once every 10 years. So you kind of have to start from scratch each time. And so we've been working since last August. Redistricting happens on several levels, of course. We are responsible for the statewide redistricting. So that's 4 different maps: congressional, state senate, state assembly, and then board of equalization. So that's 4 board of equalization districts, 80 state assembly, 40 state senate, and 52, not 53, congressional. California lost a seat this round, and first time in history. And so that means all the districts, eventual districts, will be a little bigger this time. Sometimes people are worried, which district is going to get cut. Well, it doesn't really happen that way, right? Because all the districts have to be roughly equal in population. So basically all the districts will get a little bit bigger. So that's 176 districts we have to draw. As well, of course, there's other redistricting going on. Counties, Santa Clara County will be doing its supervisorial district redistricting. Cities do their redistricting, school districts, water districts, park districts, and so on and so forth. So a lot of redistricting activity, a lot of demand for technical consultants, and legal counsel, and it's a fairly small universe of people who specialize in this, since it only happens once every 10 years. For better or worse, the timeline this time around has gotten stretched out. The 2010 commission, from beginning to end, had 7 months, which is crazy to get, to start from scratch, to do something that's never been done before, to not even have office space from the get-go, and from nothing to get organized, draw the maps, get input and draw the maps and submit them in 7 months was an amazing accomplishment that they were able to do. This time it's really stretched out, and it's mostly because the census was delayed so severely. About a 6-month delay in the census this time because of the pandemic, as well as because of new and fairly ambitious goals this time around. One of the new processes that the census is using this time, something called differential privacy. And the idea is that sometimes if you're the only, so I'm Chinese American, if I were the only Asian American within 3 blocks of me, then it would be possible, perhaps, if you had census data to figure out exactly who I was based on the aggregated census data, because I was, a certain category that was unusual for my census block. So differential privacy adds a little bit of statistical noise into the census data so that someone cannot be identified individually. So census data is supposed to be anonymized. And as we live in an era of big data and lots of number crunching ability, this is seen as a requirement to maintain trust so that people will report their census data and return their census questionnaires, and they need to be assured that they cannot be identified personally, even with somebody with a huge, data processing capability. So differential privacy, a brand new technique the census is using this time around, and that takes time to implement. So the timeline, right now we're at the end of the education presentation, and this is one of those education presentations, winding that down and just about to start our public input meetings. Public input meetings are to get people's communities of interest. And that's a region, a geographical region that's tied together in your mind by something, economic interests, geography, maybe an urban rural boundary of some kind, a public transportation network, a school district, something that constitutes a geographical area in your mind that should not be divided. And so getting community of interest input is a big part of our work, and we're going to start that work hosting public input meetings for communities of interest in just a week or so. Finally, mid-August, we expect the census data to start landing from the Census Bureau. We have something called the statewide database. It's created by the state legislature. It's housed at UC Berkeley, at the UC Berkeley School of Law. And it provides a statewide repository for census and election data for us to use, as well as all different redistricting efforts, as well as the general public. It's all public info, and that's the state repository for that. The statewide database has to do a certain amount of processing of the data that comes from the census. It's a little complicated because this time, since the census has been so delayed, there was pressure on the census to try to accelerate the process somehow. And so one thing they did is, okay, we'll release the data 2 weeks sooner, but it's going to be in a legacy format, an older format. All the numbers will be right. It'll be the same numbers that will later release in a full format, but it'll be in an older format that will require more processing on your part. So that will happen mid-August. The statewide database will then start using that legacy format data and updating the format to something we can use. California also, for the first time, will be doing prisoner reallocation. So the idea is to take people who are incarcerated in state institutions and move them into their last known address for redistricting purposes. So they will be counted for redistricting purposes at their last known address rather than at their place of incarceration. This is new. This was not done in 2010. It's something that we and a number of other states are trying out. So that takes some time by the statewide database to reallocate those folks. So at some point, probably September 30th at the earliest, could be later, we'll finally get the numbers that we can use for redistricting. It's super late. It's 6 months later than the normal deadline. We'll put together draft maps, and then at some point, and you see those last 3 bullet points, the deadlines are really still fuzzy. December to January, December to February. Partly that's because there's a constitutional deadline ordinarily of August 15th in a regular year to get our final map submitted. Because of the pandemic, we got a special ruling from the state Supreme Court that we could take till December 15th. But then, since the census data is dropping even later than the Supreme Court thought it would, the deadline gets extended even later. Now, the problem is the current extension would take us to the end of December, which means the public comment on our draft maps would have to happen right during the holidays. Okay, we're getting tons of input from Legal Women Voters and other organizations that's just not nice to have the most critical time for public comment to come right during the holidays, right when people are just busy with family and so forth, especially a pandemic year. The first time last year, people missed their family get-togethers, and this year they'll probably get together for the first time in 2 years. And how can we expect a good public input process if that's the time period? So there's some interest in us pushing to put the final map deadline as late as February. Now, the problem, of course, there is that pushes up against next year's election calendar, right? Primary elections, ordinarily early June. Would they need to be late June or even later? Is that even feasible? And our poor public elections officials, right now, they're dealing with a probable recall election, right? On top of everything else. And it's just a perfect storm. So that's an open question. The timeline is still somewhat vague, and we're still hearing from the public and considering exactly when to set our map deadline. Whatever the deadline is, as we draw our maps, these are the 6 criteria that we are going to use by constitutional requirement. And these are ranked. So these are in order that we need to consider them. The first, of course, is equal population. Districts need to be roughly equal, and there's a tiny bit of leeway. It doesn't have to be to the last person, but have to be roughly equal in population. Number 2, the Voting Rights Act, 1965 Voting Rights Act, as amended, we need to comply with to make sure that minority populations are not gerrymandered out of fair representation. Number 3, contiguity. Districts have to be one whole piece. The only time that becomes an issue is if there are islands or something. Normally, that's not a big issue. Number 4, communities of interest. That's the really interesting one, where we get different input from the public and anyone and everyone to weigh in on, where that boundary between District 17 and Congressional District 17 and 18 should fall, and try to weigh all those different opinions. Number 5, geographically compact. That doesn't mean pretty. There's a human psychological bias towards pretty shapes, simple shapes. But if you look at city boundaries, those of you who looked at a city boundary, cities are actually very oddly shaped for the most part, unless you're, San Francisco with water on 3 sides. Most cities actually have a pretty irregular boundary. Geographically compact means that we can't draw a district such that we skip over one population in order to get to another population. That's the way it's defined for us. So it doesn't have to be pretty, but you can't skip over nearby population or distant population. And then 6 nesting districts, and this is the last ranked criterion. So of course, it's the one that gets kicked around and ignored the most. Where possible, we're to nest 2 assembly districts into 1 state senate district, since there's 80 state assembly districts and 40 state senate districts, and then to nest 10 senate districts into each Board of Equalization district, as much as possible. Yeah, but again, that's number 6, and so it's the one that loses to the other 5 when push comes to shove. So that 4th one, communities of interest, a concentrated population which shares social and economic interests, and it's pretty vague, and so it just depends on how a district sees itself and the input that we get, and how it weighs against other considerations. Political, we can weigh just about everything except not politics. You can't say, well, mostly Green Party people live here, so we want to be kept together. That's not something we can consider, but we can consider almost everything else. So we take community of interest testimony in all different ways. People can call in to any of our meetings, but especially these public input meetings that we'll start in a week or so. People can, of course, write in. You can draw something on the back of a napkin and mail it in to us, and that will certainly be included in our community of interest testimony. People can raise issues without drawing a map. They can just describe something to us, and we can weigh that. And then you can also draw a map, of course. And there's different ways to do that. The back of the napkin works. We also have a map drawing tool there at drawmycacommunity.org. And that is the first time this is being used. A lot of other states are actually looking at us jealously and trying to get advice on how we did this. So an easy to use public online mapping tool, that people can use. It's open now. You don't have to wait for, a certain period of time where we're taking input from Cupertino. You can draw this now. Anyone can use this. You can submit something anonymously. And this input will go into our data management system and eventually be collected along with all the other input that we get. Okay. So summing up, ways to provide public input through that communities of interest tool. We'll also have a paper version of this that we'll try to distribute, including putting it in post offices and stuff, where people can find copies of that through our website. You can also get to that tool, email, phone, and then just regular snail mail. And we have all these things available in English and 12 other languages, which includes both simplified and traditional Chinese. I'm very proud of that. And then even in the public input meetings, you can request a translator, or actually we have these 12 languages divided out into a bunch of the meetings that will be specially designated with designated time for, let's say, Vietnamese or so forth, people to give input. Yeah, so really wanting to make sure people have access, redistricting is based on everyone, all 40 million Californians, not just citizens, not just voting age, everyone in California is considered in, the population that goes into redistricting. And so that includes people who whose first language is not English. So we've made quite an effort to make sure that our materials and our meetings are accessible in other languages as well. Okay, just as a reminder once again, we can talk about everything, but we can't talk about where actual lines go. So no public input today. You can give your public input any of those ways that I just mentioned, and I'll drop links for those into the chat as well. There's our general access, and I believe Rick has this, or actually has a longer version even of this slideshow available, so he can make that available to you.
Great.
Okay, I'll stop share and we can open it up for
Yeah,
discussion.
Russell, I do have updated contact information also. I know
Okay.
staff changes and Patricia isn't there, but
right.
I will save that. See, right now there's just one question which seems to really, pardon the pun, kind of come very close to the line of the type of question that you can't respond to, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Sure.
Can you comment on any significant changes likely to occur from the last redistricting?
Sure. Well, the first one, of course, is that we are going to be drawing 52, not 53 congressional districts. So that means every district will change. There's no question about it. Even if population hasn't changed, districts will change because we'll have one fewer district. I would say, okay, people have moved, you know, I mean, if you just, not talking about lines, but just about populations, here in the Bay Area, there's been a lot of migration out to the exurbs, right? To the Central Valley. For Silicon Valley, you've gotten growth in places like Gilroy, right? And out points distant. Here in farther up, we've got a lot of migration out to Modesto, Tracy, you know, East Contra Costa County, and so forth. Down in Southern California, there's a lot of growth in Western Riverside County and Western San Bernardino County. And so, you know, the lines there will certainly change. So those are some of the big changes. We had the big fires up north, you know, that led to a lot of movement, a lot of people. More recently, the pandemic has really accelerated some of those trends of people moving out to the exurbs. And a lot of that actually happened right after the census, right? Census day is April 1st. So a lot of that movement in 12 months since there, 12, 13, 14 months since then, was not captured in the census. And so that actually will not figure into our district lines, but will be picked up in 2030.
Right. Now, with one less district, that means a member of Congress will lose their job, or their job will disappear.
Well, we don't, that's, in a sense, that's really not the best way to think of it, though, because it's not as if all the incumbents are going to get reelected. I mean, that probably, right? I mean, theoretically, that's possible. You know, one of the problems with the old way of drawing districts is actually the last redistricting plan before the commission got dubbed. So the 2000 redistricting plan got dubbed the incumbent job protection plan, because there was so little turnover in our congressional delegation year to year, or decade to, or election to election, because of the way districts have been gerrymandered by the incumbents. So that's less the case now. I suppose the most accurate way to say it is there's no possibility that every incumbent will be reelected. Yes, that's true. On the other hand, we like to think of it, well, the districts will all get a little bit bigger. And so you're going to be gaining neighbors in your district. I think that's actually the best way of thinking about it.
Okay. I'm going to throw up the slide with the most recent contact info.
Oh, very good. Thank you so much.
And then we do have, I just lost my screen. There was another question. Anjali, do you mind reading Tom's question there?
I'm going to have Tom speak it up. Go ahead, Tom. Unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, I gotta click a bunch of buttons here to find my question. Let's see, where was my question? Oh,
About communities of interest, I think.
Yeah, it's because it looks like there's 3 different opportunities for community input in terms of live meetings. And the next 2 that are coming up is June, August is communities of interest input meetings. And then September 30 to October 31 pre-map input meetings. My question is, what's the difference between those 2? What's kind of the focus of, it sounds like the community of interest one, you gave those factors. I just want to understand better what the difference of those 2 periods are.
So right now, community of interest input is happening without the census data. So people are just giving us general ideas of what they think their community of interest is. Later, after the census data is available, then we can actually start talking about real draft districts. And so that'll be a different discussion, because we'll have actual census data that we have and that the public has to work with, and they can start proposing, actual possible districts based on the actual data that we'll all be using. So I think that's the main difference between the 2.
Okay. So at the second one in September and October, it'll be like, you can say, well, why is this neighborhood included here and this not? Because it's, although that's not, it's before the maps though, but it'll be with the district, it'll be with the census data, you're saying.
Right. We can have a more specific and concrete discussion at that point.
I get it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
It's really crazy how late the census data is. I mean, it's a nationwide redistricting crisis, actually, because we can't do anything without those numbers. Right? Nobody can do anything. So
I'm going to throw up another graphic that came out of the commission's work, which is, I think, one of the more effective illustrations of how gerrymandering happens. And it really makes one appreciate how difficult the job of the commission is. One of the questions or a comment, Oren, our former mayor and council member, commented about the Cupertino's congressional anomaly. I don't know that I know what that is. I don't know if Russell, you want to comment on that, or if perhaps Oren, you need to clarify.
I think he referred to it already. So Cupertino has is in 2 congressional districts, with a little bit of a wedge, very small wedge, which many of us were surprised about last time. So, the first input that we should give as a community of interest is keep Cupertino whole,
together,
even before we know anything else, and go on from there. So.
Absolutely. That is exactly the input that we want to hear. Now, of course, there might be a difference of opinion on that. Some people might think that having 2 different members of Congress represent you gives you 2 votes instead of 1 vote, right? So some people might feel that's good. Other people, of course, feel like, oh, then you have to spend twice as much time getting people's attention and raising your issues. So please keep us together. Yeah, we want to hear that input. Of course, I wasn't there in 2010, so I don't know why the line divided Cupertino, but that's exactly the input we want to get from you and the public.
Great, thank you. Other questions for Russell? So I expect that we're going to be hearing more media chatter about this as we get closer to a deliverable from the commission, and I know we'll have plenty of more questions. No more questions in the chat or any hands to be raised? Well, great.
Just, it's interesting that, so I know 2 people that have applied for the county thing already. I mean, there's 2 people that have applied for it. So there's a lot of interest there as well. So
it's a national issue as well. I mean, it's very local as well as national. Those of you who are following the voting rights legislation debates in Congress right now, one of the provisions in HR 1 would be to require all 50 states to use independent redistricting commissions. rather than, you know, about a third of the, or maybe a quarter of the states right now. So that's, you know, that would be really, really interesting. And if, you know, if that were to pass, wow, you know, it would be a very different landscape for sure.
Wow, indeed.
Great. Well, thank you, Russell. Thank you for your work. It's not easy, but it is also profoundly important. So thank you so much. And we have the contact information that we will also send out to everyone.
Sure. I mentioned one last thing.
Distribute that. Yeah, please.
One last thing. You know, it is actually not too early to start thinking about the 2030 Commission. You think about it. So the only requirement is to be a registered voter. And so, in fact, kids who are 8 years old right now could theoretically qualify for the 2030 Commission. Think about that. There are certain requirements that take a little bit of foresight. For instance, you cannot have changed your political party for the past 5 years, I think, before you apply. You cannot have served as an elected official, and there's certain political contribution limits and so on and so forth. So somebody who might be interested in 2030, it's not too early to just glance over those requirements and have those in mind in the next 10 years as you think about this. Also, if you have any friends from the far north, unfortunately, we have no commissioners from north of Yolo County. And sadly, this is actually the first commission also did not have anyone from the far north. So we really want to increase applicants in 2030. We really want to increase applicants from the far north. Also, we have no Native American commissioners, unfortunately, and no Southeast Asian commissioners. Although we're quite diverse, we didn't manage to get commissioners from either of those backgrounds. So 10 years from now, definitely want to especially encourage applicants from those backgrounds.
Well, Russell, in talking about encouraging people to get involved, do you mind sharing a little bit about how you ended up getting involved? You had just so much free time, you needed something to do?
Sure. Yeah, you know, it really is the political climate in recent years so polarized, so antagonistic. Really, you know, feeling like our democracy was hanging in the balance and wanting to do something, and seeing friends get involved in this and that and protests or different things, never really feeling like that was something I wanted to do. But the commission, wow, a way to be on everyone's side. You know, I can honestly walk up to any one of 40 million Californians and say, my job on commission is to be on your side, and say that truthfully. And to be part of this work of strengthening our democracy, you know, I mean, at a very fundamental, you know, a tiny, tiny, tiny bit of the process, but a very important and necessary part of the process. So it seemed like a great opportunity. Also, just as a third generation Oakland native and California native, and just loving our state and wanting to give back, what a great opportunity. Another big reason was it sounded like a chance to just travel all over the state. And as it happens, I'm a runner, marathons and stuff, and I was looking forward to all these great runs all over the state. And then the pandemic happens, and we've been on Zoom this whole time. So there's a possibility that we may later this year be able to start going into in-person meetings, but not so far. But great hearing from people from all the state and just being part of this effort. And it is, you know, sometimes I've chatted with other commissioners, and it is intimidating. It's a big responsibility. We're not professional politicians. And we have to trust that the citizens knew what they were doing when they decided to entrust this responsibility to a citizen panel. I was talking to a friend of mine and, you know, talking about how, well, was this really a good idea? And he said, well, think about it. What did the professionals come up with? They came up with districts that caused all the problems that led to this in the first place, right? So yeah, falling back on that trust. And of course, the legislature has been very good about supporting us with everything we need in funding to hire staff and expertise and so on and so forth. So that's been a great experience. Oops, you're on mute. Right?
I think Marian wants to ask a question.
Mhm.
Go ahead.
Please.
Thank you. Russell, as a representative of the League of Women Voters, I'm quite interested in the work that you're doing. I was wondering, when you have the public input meetings, do you foresee that they will be in person or will you be doing them on Zoom?
Right now, the ones that we have scheduled through July, I think, are all Zoom. Then we'll see what happens from then. Partly, we're waiting for a definitive statement from the governor. Right now, we're under emergency allowances for Zoom meetings and so forth under our Open Meeting Act laws. What happens when things start opening up? Will that change? Will we still be allowed to meet on Zoom? That's actually not known yet. We'll see. We want to get out there. We want to travel. We hope to, and it looks like we'll probably be able to at some point, but we just don't know for sure yet. Well, we definitely appreciate the League's interest. We regularly have public comment from League members. The League was quite involved in 2010. It actually sponsored the final report on the 2010 Commission, and we appreciate all the organizations that have supported this effort.
Well, Russell, again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your work. And please have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. And we wish you, very selfishly, the best of luck and success.
Thank you so much, Rick. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Sure. Great. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone. We have, that's it for the meeting. We have, some of you may have heard that there's been some staff changes. So we don't have a report from the city unless, Hung, you want to give us an informal, unofficial view from the council dais?
Well, the council is looking for a new city attorney. So our interview, if you've seen our announcements this coming Sunday, it's a whole day event.